right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Justice Forum for this evening's Millennium Stage presentation, brought to you by the Centene Charitable Foundation, with major support provided by Target and the Marriott Foundation. As a courtesy to this evening's artists and other audience members, we ask that you silence your mobile devices at this time. We do encourage you to post pics and hashtag Millennium Stage, hashtag Kennedy Center, and hashtag Library of Congress. Every day, the Millennium Stage celebrates the human spirit by presenting a free performance at 6 p.m., 365 days a year, although this year it will be 366 days. All of our performances are broadcast live and available on demand at kennedy-center.org, as well as on Facebook and YouTube, to make the arts as accessible as possible. Tonight's performance is part of a special brand new series called Library X Reach, LGBTQ+ Changemakers, and it is taking place every Monday in February, presented in partnership with the Library of Congress. We at the Kennedy Center are proud to partner with the Library of Congress to educate and elevate LGBTQ+ voices at the nation's Performing Arts Center. And so now, please join me in welcoming Meg Metcalf from the Library of Congress.
Waiting for the applause to end. Good evening. Thank you everyone for coming out. My name is Meg Metcalf. I am the LGBTQ+ Studies Librarian at the Library of Congress. So can I see a show of hands? How many of you have been to the Library of Congress before? All right, not too bad. Well, for those of you who have not stopped by before, I am here to let you know we are the world's largest library, and we are a working public library open to everyone. So please come by and stop and see us. We have collections and services for everyone, and we put on great programs like tonight. So join me without further ado in giving a warm welcome to our panelist and moderator for LGBTQ+ storytelling, a panel discussion.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Buckwalter-Posa. Thank you so much to Meg and to the Library of Congress for putting together this panel. It's an exciting opportunity to get together and discuss storytelling and through so many different avenues, I think, for each of us personally and professionally. For my part, I'm an attorney by training and a writer and an advocate for civil rights more broadly. Most recently, as a plaintiff in a First Amendment suit against the president, successful. I'm also the founder of We Crush Wednesday, which is DMV's group for non-binary, non-gender conforming, and woman-identified people to get together, form community, assist one another, and network. And I am also involved with LPAC, which is the only organization dedicated to the political power of LGBTQ+ women. And with that, we'll hand it over to Jen.
I'm Osio. I'm Jen Deerenwater. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. I am a freelance investigative journalist, and I'm the founding executive director for Crushing Colonialism, which is an international indigenous multimedia collective, and we work to elevate the voices of indigenous people, and we do that by supporting indigenous media makers. And I myself am bisexual and two-spirit and multiply disabled.
I believe I missed the prompts. Am I just saying how great I am?
Dr. Hunter, please by all means inform us how wonderful you are, and if you'd like, jump into storytelling in your life.
Okay. Catching my breath. Hi, how is everyone this evening? Wonderful. It's a beautiful evening in our nation's capital. My name is Dr. Lourdes Ashley Hunter, and among many things, I am an oracle, orator, healer, and the executive director of Trans Women of Color Collective, based here in Washington, D.C. It is an organization that is led by and for Black and brown, trans and gender expansive individuals, working towards collective and healing for all oppressed communities. I'm excited to be here. There was a prompt, what does storytelling look like? I think we're all going to talk about that a bit. I think every day we tell a story. We have an opportunity to write a narrative that is representative and reflective of who we are and who we see ourselves are and who we aspire to be. So I hope to share just a snapshot of what that looks like for Black and brown trans folk here tonight. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Ebony Bell. I'm the owner of Tag Communication and the editor-in-chief of Tag Magazine. Tag Magazine is a print publication, website, 2 podcast shows that's designed for everything lesbian, queer, and under the rainbow. About 7 years ago, I decided to leave my job to tell stories. I noticed that other media and publications within our community, all I was seeing was white gay men, and I wanted to change that. I wanted to tell LGBTQ women's stories, and I'm proud of how far Tag Magazine has come. I'm proud I was featured in Forbes as a Black change maker, and I just look forward to the change and the difference that Tag is going to make within the community.
Can everybody hear me? Good. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Mark Lockwood. I'm a PhD student, a 3rd year in the Department of American Studies at the University of Maryland, where so I come into this work actually twofold. So on the one hand, I come into this work as an interdisciplinary scholar that writes and theorizes about the visual and sexual representations of Black gay men in pornography in the late 90s. And then also I come into this work as a practitioner who works at the intersections of sex work advocacy as well as decriminalization and harm reduction. So I've spent 6 years of my life organizing and advocating on behalf of sex workers, both in New York and in DC. And now I currently work at the Center for Harm Reduction Services at the Department of Health in in Baltimore, where I oversee all programming for sexual health services for local health departments and nonprofits. Currently, I'm the creator of Sex in the Margins, an oral history project which is committed to documenting, archiving, and sharing the lived experiences of Black and Latinx sex workers in DC, Baltimore, and New York City. I'm actually launching the site at the end of the month, which I'm very excited about, and have co-authors that I'm currently in the process of interviewing, and I'm thankful for them sharing their stories with me. I came into this work, I would say, through storytelling through my great-grandmother. Growing up, I would always sit with her. She was a former daycare owner in Miami, Florida, and we would just go and talk about her lived experience of being a Black woman growing up in the 1930s and having my great aunt and being a teenage mom and what that was like through her experience. And so that intergenerational exchange really inspired me to do the work that I'm currently doing, and I'm very excited to be in conversation with everybody here today. Thank you.
Well, hello, friends. I'm so excited to be on this space with you and to share this space with all of you. I am Rebecca Kling. I'm a storyteller. I'm a performance artist and educator. I work with young people at Camp Aranutic, which is a camp for trans and gender variant youth. And I also am a communications professional and advocate both in the trans community and in the larger progressive space. And I really came to storytelling through performing. That's my background, that's my history. My first love is storytelling. And I'm really excited to talk more this evening about how we use that and how we both use that as something to sustain ourselves and to have fun with, as well as something to foster change in the world.
Well, I've got my list of questions. There are a couple. Do you feel represented? I think that's been a resounding no in terms of what's out there in mainstream media. So my question for the panelists is, how have you been able to penetrate mainstream media? How have you been able to get your projects off the ground? For those of you who are executive directors and founders, how have you been able to crack into coverage in terms of journalism or bring your creative products into the fictional space that is otherwise typically dominated by cis, hetero, white men.
I don't feel like I've cracked mainstream media, to be perfectly honest. As a journalist, I write primarily for independent press. I am interested in mainstream media to get a bigger audience, but it's not easy. I tend to write about things like indigenous issues, the Two-Spirit community, about disability justice, and that's not really something a lot of the mainstream media wants to hear. And it's really difficult. All of my communities suffer from hyper-erasure. And for me, doing the storytelling, it's about telling my stories, but it's also about making sure my community's stories are being heard. Because how do you advocate for a group of people that the majority of the world doesn't think exists? It's not uncommon for me to meet someone and have them say, oh, I've never met a Native American. I thought you were all dead. I hear people use the past tense when they talk about Native people a lot. Unfortunately, even within the queer community, I encounter people that say that bisexuality isn't real. So, yeah, I wish I could say that I've gotten into the mainstream media, but it's been tough. Yeah, that's where I'm at. But I'm still beating on those doors. I'm doing what I can. Well.
I would like to say that, I don't look to mainstream media to tell my story. I'm not interested in my story being told from a white cis gaze. I see that as exploitation, commodification. And so for me, even though recently we have seen more narratives of Black trans folk in mainstream media, I don't look to mainstream media to tell the stories. However, the work that I have done has been able to penetrate mainstream media. Our work has been featured in many different publications, writing from Time to NBC to 2020 to PBS to even Wall Street. Our work is featured because it's transformative, it's innovative, and also because there's this narrative around commodification of Black trans bodies and Black trans narratives. And I think what's really important, what is happening now, is that we're able to tell our own stories in mediums that we control. You have Raquel Willis, who is the executive editor of Out Magazine. You have Janet Mock, who has just sealed a multi-million-dollar deal with Netflix. And you have others who are really paving the way for the narratives of folk that look like us, Black trans folk, fat, Black, bald-headed, disabled folk from the hood. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, right? Yes, you can snap and clap for that. Because, we know the average lifespan of what we've seen of Black trans women is less than 30 years old, I think. And people have those questions about that life expectancy number, and it's just taken from the violence and the deaths that we've seen. It's a simple math equation. You add up the ages of those who've been murdered, you divide it by the number of people who have been murdered, and you get a number. It's real simple. And so as someone who's 43 years old and who has been engaged in storytelling since I was 17, so that's about 27 years of telling my own story because I didn't see it reflected. I didn't see it affirmed and celebrated, I think is important. But I think also what's important is not looking for someone else to tell my story. You can't tell it like I tell it. What the Lord has done for me. That's what they say in the Southern Christian Church. And so I think that that's important as we're talking about how these stories are framed and who are we looking at for liberation, because it's not the oppressor.
All right, I didn't know if you were looking for everybody to answer. I'm sorry. So, honestly, they nailed it. I don't even think about mainstream media. I can't count on mainstream media to tell our stories. And I actually question mainstream media with how genuine they are when they tell our stories. You see a lot of political things. They're just talking barely about trans women of color and what's happening to trans women of color. And I wonder, where is that really coming from? Are they in the news writing rooms? Is there somebody standing up saying, hey, we got to tell these stories? Are there people that look like us in the news writing rooms? Even within our own LGBTQ publications, I don't see people who look like me on their team, and that's a problem. We can't tell the stories if the people aren't in the room, or you're genuinely wanting to find the story and tell the story because you want people to know about it. So I think you all nailed it. I don't think we're there yet, and honestly, I just don't even think about them. I don't count on mainstream media because we're the best people to tell our stories.
Mark, you look like you wanted to say something.
So your comment actually, Ebony, reminded me of thinking about self-articulation and the politics around representation. And I think that what's been happening now is more recently, mainstream media is trying to push, quote, authentic narratives. And I'm thinking about this in relationship to Pose, for example. How many of y'all know what Pose is in this room? Right? No, for those who don't know what Pose is a show on FX which really is doing the work of rehistoricizing the lives of Black, queer, and trans folks in New York City at the height of the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s through ballroom culture. And I think that although it's written by Ryan Murphy, a white gay man, one of the things that he does is, as you pointed out, he has Janet Mock as an executive producer of the show. He also has Ryan Swain and all these other Black, queer, and trans folks, Angelica Ross as well, who's at the forefront of the show, right? And I think it's important to have people, as you pointed out, who have lived experience, people who engaged in sex work, people who are Black, queer, and trans, really in the writing room, in the production room, and doing choreography. I think it's really important. So, yeah.
And I'm curious, I guess, sort of going to Ebony's point as well about representation within communities of color, within the queer community. I guess if there's one thing that I hear akin to, oh, I didn't realize there are Native Americans, I get a lot of, well, you don't look Mexican. Which, by the way, Mexico and Colombia, totally different countries, but there's a lot of sort of policing of, there's a desire to make legible what someone's race or ethnicity is, or their sexual orientation, or their gender identity that is harmful, dangerous, complicated, and also complicates our work as we seek representation within the work that we're doing as storytellers. So I was wondering if any of you would like to comment on that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's this binary around Black trans women narratives of what is acceptable. Either you're a beauty queen, you're someone who is palatable or who is in line with the gender binary, or you're someone who is obviously trans and does not fit into that binary. And so we see stories about the stories that we are seeing in mainstream of those who are thin, who are what society would call attractive when we're talking about European beauty standards, or we're seeing narratives that are just exclusive to this performance narrative, actors or actresses or folks in the ballroom scene as we talk about Pose. Like, I'm an academic working on my second doctorate. Like, where is that story? Where's the story about the homemaker? Where's the story about the engineers? Where are the stories about those who want to cook for a living, the garbage man? Where are the stories about the trans woman who delivers the mail every day and provides for her family? And so we need to get out of this binary and this narrative about what stories are being told and who we're celebrating. We really need to, not we, you really need to interrogate how you continue to, place binary narratives or narratives that are restrictive, not just on trans people, but even in your own life. Like, what expectations do you hold for yourself as you're looking at hegemonic culture? And how are you also working to dismantle those narratives and then leveraging your access to privilege to create opportunities for others?
And if we want to get real, I always say this, we're looking at, again, mainstream to accept us and all of these things, but we got to do work right here. We can't expect them to do all these, to understand this and understand that. Like you said, within our own community, bisexuality, it's like you all are erased. And we got to fix that within our own community before we scream it to everybody else outside of our community. So that's just one thing that I say all the time. I think, it's hard to say, but we got to do the work here. There's racism within the LGBTQ community.
Fat phobia, xenophobia, ableism.
Yeah, all of it. And people, it's so funny because straight people will always be like, wow, really? I can't believe that. You guys are all the same. You guys, fighting for the same thing. It's like kumbaya. And it's like, listen, we all come, at the end of the day, we all come from different backgrounds and cultures, and we bring that crap right into our...
Do you really not love Pete Buttigieg?
No. But no, that's all I wanted to say. I think we have to be real about what's happening in our own community. And I love my community, but I'm also going to stay on my community as well.
And I think that speaking as a white person, like fellow white people, we have to use our privilege, and we have to fucking use, we have to use, it was so quick into the evening, we have to use Google. Like, it's unacceptable to say, well, wait, are there really black trans actors? It's unacceptable to say, well, wait, are there really Asian and Pacific Islander trans authors? It's unacceptable to say, well, are there really gay men who have disabilities and are still acting? Like, those should not be questions that people have to ask when they're setting up events, or when they're picking media to show to students, or when they're figuring out what shows to go review or shows to bring into a space. That it doesn't mean we're always going to do it right, but to say, oh, I didn't know it even existed, is not acceptable.
So, a couple of things on my mind. One, I apologize I didn't say this earlier, but I want to acknowledge that we are currently on Piscataway land, and that's really important that we always remember that we're always traveling upon some indigenous nation's land, and we have to think about what they lost so that we can all be here on this land. And so then just a little bit earlier about like how you were both saying you don't look to the mainstream media to tell your stories. Just to be clear, when I talked about trying to get into mainstream media, I meant getting voices like ours. I don't want a het, cis, able-bodied white man telling my story. I want another Native person or another queer person, that's another person with disability telling those stories. And so for me, when I think of mainstream media and independent media, because we still have a lot of work to do there, it's about bringing in these diverse people and these diverse stories and telling them authentically and in a way that doesn't belittle us or tokenize us or turn us into some kind of trauma or poverty porn. Oh man, I had another comment too on the last question. Oh, when you said you don't look Mexican. I get that a lot. Oh, you don't look like an Indian. To which my response is always, well, I'm not an Indian. People aren't from India. And what exactly should I look like? And generally, everyone's idea of what Native people are supposed to look like is all based on those really racist old Western movies. Like, those were predominantly white people doing red face. I mean, in this, they still have that. You see, non-Native people wearing headdresses and stuff, and, people don't actually know anything about us. And then, furthermore, we're not really a race of people. We are made up of distinct sovereign nations, and that's something different than being a race. Race is a social construct in general, but, for my people, like I'm Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, and we are very different than, say, I don't know, people from like the Pacific Northwest. We're different than the Piscataway, the Choctaw, and so forth. You know, there may be some commonalities, but we're all still different and our histories are different. And that also comes to gender. A lot of us, not all, but a lot of our nations tribal nations had more than 2 genders. Mine had more than 2 genders. And so that's also part of what brings me to this work, is that a lot of the stories of our Two-Spirit people have been erased. You know, our multi-gendered people were some of the first ones who were rounded up and murdered during the early years of the white invasion. And, you know, our people are still going murdered and missing. And, you know, that's part of why I do this work, is to try to tell those stories and keep our communities and our cultures alive.
So I'd love to hear from each of you a little bit about how you came to be a storyteller. I know I might not have thought of myself per se as a storyteller until I had an opportunity with Story District to tell a story as part of Queer Cuentos about Latinx people and coming out, about coming out to my grandmother and being rejected. And that process of cultivating a sort of, an oral history, a spoken narrative, made me realize, okay, I'm a storyteller, and made me a lot more thoughtful about it. I would love to hear from you how you grew into a storyteller.
Well, I actually just told this story to my home health aide earlier today, but I started writing when I was really young. So my maternal grandma, who I called DG, she was my first scribe, basically. I was 4 years old and had this dream about fairies and flowers and things, and I really wanted to write it but didn't know how. So I told her the story, and she wrote it for me. And that's kind of where I think storytelling began for me, and I just kept writing. And when I was young, I was like, oh, I'll write books someday, but then I got into music, and then I did politics for a while, and I just kind of bounced around, and then I landed in journalism, and I don't know, it feels like it's just where I'm supposed to be and should have always been.
Historically, African culture, indigenous culture, culture of those previously, descendants of those who were previously owned by slaves have incorporated storytelling. I think I can remember, the first stories that I can remember is like fishing with my great-grandfather on the Detroit River, just the process of watering the grass at night and laying down a plank of wood so that you would drown the worms and they would come to the surface, and then collecting the worms, and then just going out to the river, 4 or 5 in the morning, and the stories of the different fish that we would catch, from perch to carp to walleye to bass. I think that's right. And so it's always been part of my culture, being in the kitchen with my grandmother teaching me how to make barbecue pig's feet, sitting up with my mom as she sprayed the setting lotion on her hair and rolled it at night, as she talked about her day at work when she came home from cleaning white people's homes. You know what I'm saying? These were stories and traditions that have been passed down generationally, and it has always existed in our culture. And so being a storyteller, to me, is not something that's like a role. It's more of a responsibility. Like, how do we pass on traditions to the next generation? And it's really, really critical, and particularly for Black, trans, and gender expansive people, about how we see each other and know each other and love each other and believe that it's possible for us to thrive in a world that is destined to erase us off the face of the earth. So I think storytelling is as essential as breathing, as eating, as hydrating this melanin that you gaze upon this evening.
So essentially, I can say culture, it's always been this way, or even high school and being an editor or whatever. But honestly, I think I really became a storyteller when I became unapologetically Black lesbian. I had to figure myself out, and I get it. I probably was telling stories before, but I feel like I really came into my own knew the stories that I wanted to tell when I knew exactly who I was. And I mentioned to you all, with TAG, that's literally why it was started. Because I wasn't seeing our stories being told. I was tired of not seeing people who look like me. I was tired of seeing, and all kinds of women, I was tired of not seeing it. And so it's important to tell those stories. And just for historic sake, too, I think it's really important. And that's why I say I really didn't come into my own until I knew exactly what storytelling meant to me and the impact I wanted to make in this community, in the world. I want to see young folks, young LGBTQ folks pick up TAG 50 years from now, 100 years from now, and be able to see the people who came before them. That's when I became a storyteller.
So I know I talked earlier about me and my grandmother growing up, my great-grandmother growing up and listening to stories about her growing up in the 30s and whatnot. But I think when I really honed my skills as a storyteller was actually when I was a graduate student at NYU, when I was studying performance studies, and really writing about the material conditions of black gay sex workers in the porn industry and how they perform certain images that may have been seemingly problematic, right, through the white gaze. And it took a lot of me doing, really rich ethnographic research, interviewing porn actors, distributors, retailers, and producers as well, and about their experience of how they perform certain images within the industry that already commodify, black gay sex workers. And so that's how I really developed my skills as somebody that's invested in storytelling.
I was fortunate enough to grow up attending classes at a theater that had a very deep oral storytelling tradition. It was not a Jewish theater in that it wasn't a theater about Judaism, but it was a theater that was founded by Jews and had a bunch of Jewish teachers and was very much in the culture of we tell stories. That's how we communicate. That's how we teach. That's how we learn from each other. And certainly Judaism is, as we've just heard, is not unique in that. And wasn't until I was much older doing things like taking performance studies classes. I could go deep down that, and we'll do that later. And realizing, all of these tools of adaptation, of storytelling, of direct address, of narration, of metaphor, are building blocks that can be used not just for the fairy tales that I grew up with, or not just for, the shows that I was seeing on TV that were, if they were talking about gender and sexuality at all, it was rarely positive, and able to say, I can take these tools, I can take these building blocks, and use them to tell my own stories, or use them to help share stories from other members of my community, or use them to share with the youth that I work with so that they are better equipped to tell their own stories. And coming from, we are all storytellers. I have a niece and nephew, and the first thing they want to do when they see me is they want to tell a story. Oh my God, I saw a dog at the park today, and it was amazing, and it licked me. And they want to hear stories. They want to hear the same stories over and over and over again sometimes. Like, we thrive on stories. You said, and I completely agree with, that we need stories to live. It's not, and it's a very deep part of who we are and what makes us human, and I feel very fortunate that I was equipped with some of those tools in a way that really became part of the structure and the scaffolding for who I am as an adult, even if I wasn't thinking of it that way at the time.
So I have one quick question before a final opportunity to share a brief story each. If you could have one misperception or one misrepresentation corrected tomorrow, New York Times style, but essentially the entire public suddenly becomes aware of this one misperception, and they get the real data, the actual facts, what would you pick to correct?
I'm going to go deeper than some of the facts or figures or things that I would wish people would Google instead of asking me.
Please.
that it's possible to put yourself in someone else's shoes, that there is this population that seems committed to saying, I can't imagine what it's like to be a trans person. And that very quickly becomes, I can't imagine what it would be like to try and bring my family over the border without documentation, which very quickly becomes, I can't imagine what it would be like to be someone who can't accessibly use a set of stairs, which very quickly become, like, these are all related things. And the refusal of some people to even try to say, well, what might it be like to be you? I feel like is the fundamental misconception from which all of these other problems happen.
You know, I love what you offered, Rebecca. I would like to even take it a bit further. You know, we are all different and have unique journeys, but we are all human, so that makes us the same. You know, I wish that people would not have so much need to know what the fuck is going on with me, but just know that I'm human and I deserve to breathe. I deserve to live. I deserve to raise a family. I deserve to earn a living, just like all of us do. For some reason, there's this need to know, you know, well, where are you from? What's your genitalia? How are you having sex? How is this possible? All of these, that's none of your business. I wish that everyone would believe that they could mind their business and still be a whole person.
That's such a tough question. I've been sitting here racking my brain. I'm like, oh God, what do I say?
You don't have to answer it. I couldn't tell if all three of you wanted to answer it or none of the three of, okay.
I think probably my answer is going to be very similar to what Rebecca and Lourdes has said, but you know, we exist, I exist, my communities exist, we're here. Our humanity is just as important and valid as anyone else's. And frankly, I'm just really tired of having to fight for that, just to be seen as like a human being that deserves to live. You know?
And I refuse to fight anymore. Like I've said before, like I don't even have time to be trans. From being fat, black, bald-headed, disabled. Child, I have other things to worry about than I don't get persecuted for being trans. I get persecuted because I'm disabled. I get persecuted because I don't fit the narrative of hegemonic beauty standards. I get persecuted because I'm fat. I get persecuted because I'm a badass bitch with a doctorate degree. So I don't even have time to be trans. Sometimes I'm in spaces and people are like, so when did you get into trans activism? Why do you talk so much about trans people? And I'm like, you know, people need this validation. I need to out myself for you to understand the humanity. I don't need to be trans, and you don't need to be trans. You don't need to be disabled. You don't need to be poor to understand that we all deserve to access the fruits, and we all deserve to protect the fruits of this planet as humans.
Yeah. One, I hope I'm understanding your question. Kind of immediately, and I don't want to get on my soapbox here, I'm going to keep it very simple. And outside and inside the LGBTQ community, I'm tired of seeing Black and brown people villainized. I'm tired of it. And what I'm getting at basically is it doesn't matter how many white men can shoot up the place. The facts and figures are there. Let one Muslim, let one brown person do something, and it's put on the whole entire community. The facts and figures are there about crime, about who's really on welfare and who's really taking advantage of that. I know this is kind of out of the norm, but I wish that people would really look in the facts and figures and stop villainizing people that don't even deserve it.
I guess sort of to all of these points and turning into a little bit of a law nerd for a second, I remember trying to teach college students when I was in law school. I was TAing, trying to get some extra cash, and trying to explain how we decide who's protected by the Bill of Rights, by the 14th Amendment. And talking about, well, you know, someday soon, sexual orientation and gender identity might be protected. And, you know, that would be, one very aggressive student says, well, no, but that's different. And I said, okay, you know, please explain to me, and sort of engaging in the dialogue. And he goes, because everything else, I mean, you can just tell by looking at people. And I looked at him, and, you know, I go several more rounds in the most diplomatic possible fashion. After all, the university is paying me for my time and don't need to be reported. And finally, I just look at him, because there are 20 other students there, and we're not going to have everybody getting the wrong idea. And I said, okay, what am I? If you want to tell me you know all of the ways in which I may or may not be protected by law, and that the way that you can tell is by looking, what am I? Who am I? And another student spoke up, and she cleared it up for him, and it was a student who hadn't spoken the entire time who, yeah, that was a pretty great moment. But it blows my mind still that anybody thinks they can look at somebody else and know their life, know what they're going through, know anything about their identity. So I think this might be a good jumping off point for our final segment. Is going to be, each of us is going to offer a story, if panelists feel so moved. And I'm going to offer Dr. Hunter the floor to begin.
Okay, hi everyone, back to me. Are you guys enjoying the conversation so far? I'm glad. Part of the work that I've been doing over the past 27 years is telling folk stories. I've been able to conduct anthropological studies and cultural exchanges all across the globe, working with refugees and immigrants from Uganda, Kenya, Kosovo, Turkey, the South Pacific, indigenous populations, Fa'afafani community in Samoa, just working with communities on how we tell our stories and how we move away from the white cis gaze. And when we say gaze, we're not talking about G-A-Y-S, right? We're talking about G-A-Z-E. Just want to, for the academics and intellectuals in the room.
Sometimes there's an overlap.
Well, you know what? Yeah, 2 can equal 1 sometimes. And so, but I'm speaking specifically about this gaze, this narrative. And so, but more importantly, what we've seen, how many of you have seen stories about the murders of Black trans women? Show of hands. How many of you have seen these stories depicted in a problematic light that elevates their criminal history, what's potential sex work, what were they doing, interrogating their existence and victim blaming? That's how we've seen our narratives told about Black trans women, and particularly when they are murdered. So part of the work we do at Trans Women of Color Collective is really mobilizing and curating spaces where Black trans people, and particularly Black trans youth, can use technology and innovation to bring voice in social justice movements around the issues that are important to us. So I want to share with you 2 particular videos in our repertoire. Yes, I said repertoire. 2 particular videos in our repertoire that were curated and created by Black trans youth. The first one we will see is just a tribute to trans women of color, or trans women period, who have been murdered. These folks have lives, they have families, they had dreams, and they had aspirations. So the particular video you're going to see right now is called Not One More. It was written by a Black trans woman named Sydney Chase. She also sings the song. And the video was put together by Celine Butler, who is an innovator and creator who's also Black and trans. What's also important about the videos that you're going to see is that we pay people for their labor. It's time for y'all to stop exploiting the labor of people. Emotional labor is a cost, and work equals payment. So it's very, very important that when we're curating and cultivating spaces, that we're paying people for the trauma they may have to experience, the labor that they are putting out, and because you should get paid for your work. So, yes, it's important. And it's one of my mantras, work equals payment. I don't open my mouth unless I'm planting a seed or reaping the benefits. So, if we can go to the first video, not one more. Dim the lights, please. Lights up, please. So yes, lights up, please. So yes, this particular video offers our community an opportunity to not just mourn and cry and not just remember our folks on T-Door, but also uplift them and elevate them and show them in a positive light, something that their parents and their friends can see and say, my child was important. My child life mattered. The second video I want to show you is to pull you up, because we don't just die, we thrive. We celebrate each other and we live and we bask. and the work that our ancestors has done for us to exist in these spaces. And after this evening, you'll be able to come over to my table and pick up a lovely story about Super Princess, which is another amazing story that uplifts Black and brown bodies and families as we navigate spaces of oppression. But the second video I want to show you, how many people have heard of the Philadelphia Trans Wellness Conference? Had an opportunity to co-chair that conference a couple of years ago, and we had some very exciting performances and activities infused into that particular conference. We had the first ever all-Black trans concert in the park. So from the staff, from the setup, to the performers, everyone was Black and trans, and everyone was paid what they said they needed to be paid. We also had the opportunity to have a film screening, and we had this opportunity to rent out the club and the VIP and pop bottles. What y'all do on the weekend, we did it on the weekend. And what's really heartfelt and what's really interesting and profound about the particular evening where we were out that night, it was the same night that the Post massacre happened. And so we had to really understand how important and sacred spaces for us, by us are. And so this particular video shares and highlights opportunities where we're curating spaces for us and by us to thrive, so we can go back out into that world that y'all benefit from. Well, actually, it fucks y'all up too, right? But we're gonna show you how we thrive in that. So if we can go with the second video, T-Walk, turn up, please. I appreciate them for giving us this space that our ancestors had already paid for. Of course it's going to be free because our ancestors already made it. This was their land. And we're not talking about the most marginalized. And we are not censoring them. Then what are we doing? The life expectancy of a trans woman of color is 35 years old. A friend of mine said to me, "Girl, you're right, like you're running out of time." I said, "Girl, I'm 33. This is my reality. Social oppression manifests in every aspect of our lives. But the way social oppression is set up, it will have you to believe that we need to be fixed. I am here to tell you that we don't need to be fixed. There is nothing wrong with us. What is wrong is society's betrayed indifference, willful ignorance, complicity, and inaction. Lights, please. Yeah, I'm super excited about these videos and other ways that we're telling our stories. And I'm really, really excited because along with these videos, I'm sorry, along with these videos and every other video trans woman,
there was something different from what other people were saying.
this is not part of, yes, thank you. So yes, along with these videos and every video that Trans Women of Color Collective has done, and every article, every blog post, every publication, every piece of research that I have touched will be archived in the Library of Congress, which is why I'm here today. So just wanted to celebrate that. And as Ebony said, 10 years, 20 years, 500 years from now, little baby queers will be able to go online and see a bad bitch like me. Thank you so much.
I think it might be time to move on to questions, unless anyone would like to. All right, all right. Please, by all means.
So the question was, what is a two-spirit? If on the Google thing, I'm like, if you Google it, you'll actually find articles I wrote on it that I was paid to write. But I'll tell you what it is right now. So two-spirit it's a contemporary English language term that is meant to encapsulate some of the non-binary gender identities that some tribal nations had before the white invasion. You know, the Lakota, I believe, had 7 genders, for example, and these genders all had different names, they had different roles, but some of that history has been lost, unfortunately, due to the genocide that we've suffered and are still suffering. So that's,
Can I ask a follow-up as part of that? Do you know, is there a general consensus on how folks who identify as two-spirit feel about that being included or not with trans or transgender identity?
Well, I want to start by saying that I don't speak for every two-spirit.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So I personally feel like being two-spirit is different than being trans, but that does not mean that someone can't be both trans and two-spirit. There certainly are plenty of people who are. For me, it sort of, it falls a bit under the non-binary umbrella, but then because this is something that has traditional roles, like a lot of our two-spirit people are ceremonial leaders, they get called in to help with negotiations. You know, so it's more than just a gender identity for us, but
Right,
it
and
does.
it's indicative to indigenous cultures and populations. So white people cannot be two-spirit.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Do you want me to say it again? Because white people are not indigenous to these cultures that have two-spirit identities. Unless there is a white culture that someone, I am an anthropologist, so we can go there. But
they still wouldn't be able to use the term two-spirit because that's a native thing, so.
Anyone have a question?
My name is Wesley Pinckney. I'm a Washingtonian. I've been here all my life. And I know a few of the people up there. I just met Jan, and Jan, I'm so glad you invited me, because what I needed to hear is that I need to tell my story. You know, I'm like the doctor there. I sat with my moms, and I heard them ladies talk about that, this, that, and everything. I know how to cook, sew, wash. I can do it all. But a lot of people haven't heard that story. And I'm in the process of getting ready to do that in April. Tell my story. Thank you.
Anyone else have a question?
affirmations are also welcome.
Yes, yes, they are.
Hi. Sorry, yeah, absolutely they are. My question is about regionalism. So coming from various parts of the country, Detroit, Oklahoma, Baltimore area, wherever else. I'm sorry, I did not catch where you guys everywhere identified coming from. But how does that play a role in all of this, as well as how to deal with certain, like I know, for instance, the Deep South has a very different relationship than maybe New York City or even DC, and how do you see that playing a role in how stories are facilitated or capable of being heard or told?
Well, so I grew up, most of my childhood was in rural Oklahoma, but I also went to high school in Abilene, Texas. Just, it's the armpit of Texas, I'm just going to say it. But then I've lived in large cities for quite some time now, all over the so-called U.S. I feel like the storytelling is different in some ways, and I'll just use an example as a journalist. When I'm interviewing somebody that's from New York or LA or DC, man, they want that interview quick, in and out, and we're done. But I'm doing a big investigative reporting project on the Mountain Valley Pipeline and how that is impacting people in West Virginia, and it's different there. People really want to sit down. They want to, I had so many people make me lunch and dinner, and it was different. There's just sort of I don't want to say slower pace, that feels kind of stereotypical, but there's more of sort of I don't know, I apologize, I'm struggling for the words, but it was just different. Like, I got to see them and really spend time with them and tell a different and deeper and richer story, I think, in some ways. Yeah.
I think we also should be careful when we talk about the North and the South. And I say that because even in the video, did you notice some of them are liberal areas, right? I think we're kidding ourselves. I think we're lucky to be in this area. It is very progressive. It is liberal. I've seen, LGBTQ people hold hands. But we would be kidding ourselves if we don't see the same thing we see here in the South. There have been tons of anti-gay bashings here. I think we've had, and somebody please correct me, I think we've had 3 trans women within months killed. Weeks, thank you, within weeks. So yes, there are some differences, but I think we need to, as the young folks say, stay woke. I think I know, I'm getting older.
Are there any young folks who can confirm?
As the young folks say. I've always kind of wanted to say that. But no, it's a good question, and I think we just need to be careful and make sure we're holding every state accountable.
I have a couple things to add there. One is, so DC, I grew up in North Carolina, but DC is the place where I encountered the threat of violence most pointedly. I remember I was walking down U Street, holding hands with my girlfriend, and a group of men behind us yelled, "We're gonna rape you straight." On U Street. I'll say growing up in North Carolina, I was a late bloomer. I was 24 before I came out, even to myself, as a lesbian. And that was absolutely influenced by the fact that I did not hear stories. I did not know queer people, especially women. They were not out. They might have a friend. That was the extent of it. And I didn't know those stories. I didn't know those people. And it was an additional layer that I was growing up culturally Catholic and Latinx. And that's part of what I carry with me. And I sort of make the decision to be proactively queer in discussions, because you never know. You never know if you're going to be that first person for someone else. And it comes with the feeling of danger for me still. But North Carolina is not the place where I experienced the worst sort of overt hatred. And I've been pleasantly surprised by the number of people that I have come out to simply by living my life who are wonderful allies. So, to Ebony's point about the North and the South not being that simple.
I want to say I agree with both Rebecca and Ebony on that. I've been called an engine back home in Oklahoma, and I've been called an engine by so-called progressive Democrats, in the Northeast. I've been told I'm just a fence sitter or a dyke or whatever when I lived in LA, just like back home. So this idea that if you're rural or urban, you're on a coast or you're in the so-called flyover states, Like, you're still going to get that oppression and hatred everywhere. It just may look a little different, I feel like. But it's still violent at the end of the day.
My grandmother said something interesting before she passed. She said, she would tell my mother, and my mother passed it along to me, storytelling, right? She said, soon the North will become the South, and the South will become the North. And I thought, it's not going to happen. But here we are, talking about discrimination and people being physically hurt right here. And you're right. A lot of the times I'm going to the South. Now, I'm not giving the South the pass here. But you're right. It's been a little bit more, calm. And I don't know if I'd say accepting, but I just thought that was interesting that she said that. Because I think in some ways that is happening. And you can agree or not agree.
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, I'll be quick. As a queer person, I think I feel a little more comfortable in DC than back home, but as a native, this has been the most hostile, just egregious place I have ever lived in the so-called US. Every day I have to pass people and businesses and cars covered in disembodied heads and hate speech. And when you do nothing more than boil a group of people down to a mascot or some kind of marketing device, you strip their humanity. And I have seen that and felt that in many spaces. I mean, including even the medical system here. I have had issues at George Washington Hospital where I had people there working there call me a redskin and think that that was okay. So yeah. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it doesn't matter where you are, but it feels like some places are friendlier or more hostile than others, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, I would like to add, for me, I don't navigate the world being oppressed as a trans person, specifically. And I've traveled the globe, Iceland, Germany, Scandinavia, Switzerland, the South Pacific, the Caribbean, Africa. And what's been interesting and what I've learned, I just look like somebody's auntie. And, somebody not to mess with me, right? I'm from Detroit, so I know, the energy that I take with me and that I put out into the world, I get that energy back. And I also know how to get up and walk away when love is not being served. And so you won't get a chance to disrespect me because I would have had to respect you first. You won't get a chance to misgender me because I would have had to have a conversation with you about my gender first. And that's not happening. We're not doing those things. And so, but it still impacts me every time someone likes me, has to face discrimination. And I will say that even coming from Detroit and living in Washington, D.C., this has been the most place where I've experienced the most trauma, and particularly from the LGBT community. So I will name that and name that you guys, those folks really need to do better. I mean, if they do or if they don't, it doesn't matter. I already won. But what I'm saying is we need to think about the spaces that we occupy and how we're creating more spaces for people to show up whole and affirmed.
I thought you were literally going to name people. I was like, oh. I would have been here for it.
MPD,
I would have been
Mayor
here for
Bowser.
it.
It's not a problem.
Oh, don't get me started.
Capital Pride.
Right, that's another
I've
panel
sued
discussion.
the city. I've sued the police department for entering my home without a warrant. Absolutely. I live in a white neighborhood, multi-million-dollar homes. There may be 3 other black people in my building. And they don't see me as trans. The first thing they see me as black. I've walked through my courtyard and had somebody ask me, do I work here? No, bitch, I own one of the units. I don't work here, And so navigating spaces of racism has been, who doesn't? This used to be Chocolate City. Now it's what, Mocha Vanilla something? So yeah, I think that
and chocolate mocha?
It's mocha latte shate, something. But as I mentioned before, I don't even have time to be trans because I'm so busy trying to make sure where's the bathroom, where's the elevator, is it safe? Are there lights? Is it accessible? And those things. But it is important, like regionally and even globally, violence is violence, right? And so we all have an opportunity to shift that narrative.
So I wanted to say thank you to Dr. Hunter, that it's one of my mentors and has been for the last 5 years. So I'm excited to be here and to celebrate with you for your work being archived in the Library of Congress, first of all. And to hear that the narrative never changes. Anytime that I hear you and anytime that I have the opportunity to sit in front of your greatness, the narrative never changes. So thank you for being true to the narrative. I also wanted to celebrate everybody else for the courage that it takes to tell a story and to be involved in storytelling, and so how exciting that is. And then the other point is we talked about several things about racism, about collateral damage. We talked about a lot of things, and I think a lot of the ways that we can solve that, certainly not everything, but a lot of the ways that we can serve that is by voting. We know that we are certainly impacted by an administration that, I am always going to talk about voting, we are impacted by an administration that does not respect the life of trans people specifically, but does not respect people, period. And so one of the ways that we can do it is voting. Get registered and vote. And a shameless plug, if you need a way to get registered to vote, you can go to our website. We are at thetransmarchondc.org. Rock the vote, you can get registered. I wanted to ask you about something that was in a piece of your work. We've often had a conversation about where this lifespan of 30 to 35 comes from. And I've done extensive research and I've not found someone that can give me an answer of where a trans person's lifespan is at 30 and 35, when we are in fact being collected in data that is suggesting that we are aging. HIV data says that we are aging, and that starts at 50. So if we are being collected in data that says we are aging, but our lifespan is at 30 to 35, I think that's at contradiction one. But if you can share where that data came from, that of the lifespan of trans people being between the ages of 30 and 35.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your question, and thank you so much for your support as well. And I mentioned this earlier, I think it was maybe 2002 or 2003. I'm not even for sure. It could have been maybe later than that, but I was speaking at a march that I helped coordinate in New York City, Trans Day of Action, which has been going on for about 15 years or so. And that particular year, there may have been 14 or 15 murders of trans women of color. And so as I said then, I just added up those ages, divided by the number of how many people were murdered. And it was actually like the mortality rate, not necessarily the life expectancy, which is a different variable. And so what has happened is people have taken that soundbite and ran with it out of context. Now, of course, in order to get someone's life expectancy, you're going to need much more data than the amount of people who have died. But we don't have access to be able to collect the data of all the trans people in the world to be able to create a model or a life expectancy model. But what we can do and what we can raise awareness around is the violence that is happening to our community. And we can say if 30 people were murdered and we added up their ages and divided by 30, we can say that this community is being murdered and their rate of ages is whatever the number comes up to. Even the CDC has determined that it is a crisis, I believe, the murders that is happening to Black trans women in the United States. No, not the CDC, the AMA, the American Medical Association. So that information that they're collecting, along with that place called HRC, which has just done a report on the murders of Black trans women, also reflects similar statistics. And so that's where that information comes from.
Part of the work that we do is we are currently funded, it hasn't announced. So a lot of the work that I'm doing is with the Centers for AIDS Research, and a lot of the things that we are looking at is where exactly that data came from and how is data collected to necessarily, I don't want to say identify the greater, how it identifies the greater population. So I would be interested, and I always have access to you, but you always travel quite a bit. I would love to have a conversation about what it looks like for you to potentially be involved in some research, data collection, so that we can look at what is the life expectancy or the mortality rate without necessarily looking at it with collecting it and adding it and dividing it, or maybe putting some additional
Well, that's how math
research.
works.
Perfect.
My invoice will reflect that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Does anyone else have a question or comment?
First off, thank you for, I don't know if you're all paid to be up there, but thank you for giving up your time, your energy, and your, not enough, and resources to be here tonight. It's really amazing to hear each and every one of you speak. My question, I think you were speaking about opportunities to open avenues for other individuals. So, so my world, for full transparency, is like I work in the HIV field. And so we recently went to an event at the Shaw Library where they were talking about the Sapphos, Sappho Sapphires, and they're speaking about like the elimination of the stories of these individuals who supported community members as like entire communities were being wiped out, and everyone was talking about the equivalent communities in the white and the Asian communities, but not the Black and Latinx communities of individuals who are being wiped out by the virus. And so like they were telling their stories, and not from a sense of survival, but a sense of joy. Like, so people talking about the parties they would have and the joy that was felt, and the positive stories that came from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, because I think you mentioned pose, and like from the aspect of surviving the AIDS crisis. But there's much more to so many people's individuals' lives, especially the individuals who are not in New York, San Francisco, LA. So what are some of the avenues that the people who are older than all of you sitting on the stage, who there's a good number of gay men and gender expansive people who aren't alive today to tell their stories. What are some of the avenues for people who are here to share, to tell their joy and tell all the wonderful stories of the lives that they live and they want the rest of the world to see? Because I think where somebody was saying, I want someone to be able to read my book, a pre-queer or baby queer, in 30 years, but like we don't have those books because those individuals weren't here today. So for me, being in my 40s, I didn't have anyone in my 70s to tell me what it means to be a Black queer individual living in urban America.
There isn't going to be one answer to that question, and I think that's a beautiful and important question. There are a couple of sort of related areas that I would speak to. First, there are at least some organizations that are trying to do some of that collecting. I know the Trans Oral History Project is working to collect stories. I know the Trans Women of Color Collective certainly does work both to gather and to help people tell their own stories. And I would also say that is a beautiful opportunity. I'm going to cheat with this answer and say it's a beautiful opportunity to create that space and to, I, from a familial standpoint, have sat down both of my parents who are in their 70s and said, we're going to talk for a couple hours and I'm going to ask you questions and I want to know what it was like growing up and I want to know what it was like being alive in this space, in this city, in this time. And finding ways to do that at a community level is really easy for me to say here sitting on stage we should do, and then the actual follow-through is a lot tougher. So I don't want to pretend that it's as easy as that, but I do think there is an opportunity, and there is an opportunity, particularly as we all have amazing video communication technology devices that can all have built-in video recording and built-in audio recording on our phones, and find ways to start collecting that as community members, even at an individual level, in the hopes of finding those larger ways to do that. Again, that is somewhat of a unsatisfying answer, because it's turning it around and saying, well, how do we do that together, rather than here is the resource to do it. So I am also curious, are there resources that folks know about that already exist?
Wow. Yeah, there's the
Library of
Rainbow-
Congress.
Yeah, Library of Congress. There's also the Rainbow History Project. They are huge. They're collecting, I mean, literally, they are doing exactly what you are talking about. And they do a lot of oral interviews and things like that to have that history to pass on to the next generation. It's amazing the stuff that they've collected. Everything from the beginning of drag king era to, I mean, there was a black lesbian woman who had a bookstore here on U Street. You know, how many people know that? Sister Space, thank you so much. Thank you. So anyway, a lot of history there. I think that'd be an amazing resource. And if you want to tell your specific story, I say contact them and tell them that that's what you want to do.
Community Promise is an intervention that allows people that are HIV positive as a way of therapy to tell their story. And also, I do know that the Transgender Law Center, Positively Trans, Cecilia Chung, and that particular organization has collected a lot of archived stories of trans people that are of age, that are trans, that are of age. But I do know that Community Promise is not just specifically for people that are TGNC. It is an intervention that is used in communities for HIV positive people to tell their stories to empower other communities. So something that you can research as well.
Sorry. There's a Jane Isay. She's a longtime journalist and leading feminist writer. One of her sons founded StoryCorps, and StoryCorps is now becoming well known because it's being aired on NPR, and all of their stories are also being housed at the Library of Congress. And so StoryCorps specializes not in LGBTQ stories, but human stories, and anybody with a story. It doesn't matter if your story is from your past and no one else remembers it, or if it's with a neighbor or a colleague or whatever. You can go and tell your story. You can actually do it on your phone. There's an app. There's a lot of ways that you can actually submit your story, and it will be heard by someone, and it even possibly will be aired in some way that more than just people in your own community can hear it. So, StoryCorps.
So there's also this great project. It's called Project 562, and it's by Matika Wilbur. She's an indigenous woman and photographer, and she started off, at the time we had 562 federally recognized tribes. Now we have, I think, 573. But her mission was to go to every nation and photograph people of all of these nations. And while it's not specifically queer, she did actually go to the Bates Powwow, which is the Bay Area American Indian Two-Spirit powwow in San Francisco. And she did this really amazing photography exhibit and interviewed and spoke with a lot of the Two-Spirit people there. So there is some documentation there. I think speaking as a Two-Spirit and as a Native, one of the issues that we have with trying to collect some of our stories and share them more widely is that a lot of our people don't have internet access, don't have phones. I mean, I've actually started doing research on this, and there was a study done that found that I think it was 68%, it was in the 60th percentile, only 60th percentile of people on the reservations have phones. There's almost no internet access, almost no cell phone access. And then even if there is, you have a population that tends to be living in pretty dire poverty. So even if you can get that internet or cell access or whatnot, can you actually afford the technology? Chances are you can't. So I think when I think for Two-Spirits, we have this tradition of oral storytelling. Storytelling is an indigenous value. It's always going to continue. But in terms of making it out there for everyone else to see, we're not even at the point of being able to do that because we just don't have the technology in a lot of cases. But yeah, check out Project 562. And come talk to me after about Crushing Colonialism, my organization, and the work we're doing.
Great. Well, we're going to wrap it up. I just wanted to say thank you all for coming today. This was the first. This was the first event we're having as part of this series as a collaboration between the Kennedy Center and the Library of Congress, and specifically elevating voices of LGBTQ+ people. We are going to be in here next Monday and the Monday after that, and then the last Monday of February we're going to be in the Family Theater. So please join us for the rest of this series if you can. If you cannot come in person, all of them will be streamed on Facebook and YouTube, along with all of our Millennium stage shows that we do. So thank you so much. Thank you to Library of Congress, and thank you to all of our panel participants.
And please stop by our tables because we have merchandise and information for you. Come on, stop by and support our work.